Hey, everybody. Welcome back to the Clean Energy Edge. Today's episode hits home because the problems we're talking about, they feel massive. Climate change, deforestation, pollution, melting ice caps. I mean, it's easy to feel like none of us can really move the needle on things that are that big. But the truth is, every global shift starts with local action. Every movement begins when one person decides to do something. And that's what today's guest is all about. Kim Gabrielli is the CEO of Worldview International Foundation. That's one of the world's leading organizations for mangrove restoration. They're working to protect and plant 1 billion mangroves by 2035 while supporting over 500,000 people in coastal communities around the world. Hey, before we get in, quick ask. Like the video, subscribe, hit those alert bells. It's totally free and it helps us keep bringing you conversations like this. Now let's get into it. Kim, welcome to the Clean Energy Edge. Great to have you here. Thanks for joining us today.
Hi, Russ. It's great being here with you, enjoying your podcast. So finally, we had the opportunity.
Awesome. Well, I want to start here because when people are looking at the state of the planet, it can feel a little bit hopeless, like very overwhelming. But there are some things that you've identified that can help in overcoming that big barrier. So, I mean, can you just talk a minute about just the overwhelming task of climate change and the environment and kind of situation we're in?
I think it feels overwhelming because it's so abstract. It's so far away, right? It feels like that. In a way, we could say that it has come closer with all the fires in California, all the floods in Europe, and of course, all the things happening on the ground in the global south as well. But still, I think people feels it's very far away from their daily lives. And I'm lucky to work directly with coastal communities around the world with mangroves, saltwater plants, and I can see it every day how it helps to do, to work on building the nature back. But for most of us, it's not like that, right? So I really would love to dive a bit deeper into that. How you and me on a daily basis actually are preventing climate change as we just go on with our normal lives and ordinary jobs. You don't have to be a amnesty campaigner to make a difference in its world, and that's the great thing about it.
Yeah, and from your experience leading a lot of sustainability efforts, really around the world, how do we get people to believe again that what they do personally actually matters and can make a difference? How do we help people to realize that every little bit counts?
So one of the things that I hear often is the question, but what can I do? Right? And that's inspired by Alistair Campbell. He's the podcast host of Rest is Politics, and he wrote a book about that. And Jane Fonda wrote a book about that as well that is called What Can I Do? And not everybody can be Jane Fonda going out on the street, demonstrations, but every one of us can do our part. And I mean, if you're an electrician, you are working, every day on making houses better, using less electricity. If you're working on construction, you're working on making the houses more isolated, so you're using less energy. And I think the motivation is, for many, the next generation, the people coming after us, but also to see that animals are actually coming back. I mean, animals are coming back in the US after decades of being almost disappearing. We see it in many countries around the world, and there are highly inspiring when we are talking about how people get better lives, right? Because of cleaner water, because of less pollution the air. In India, children not dying anymore of pneumonia, which is, as illness we can cure easily. So it's a combination of all of this that really engages people, I feel. But it's when it gets close to people, right? So when your children are, getting illnesses because of climate change, that's when you feel it. When your house is taken by climate change, then it becomes very real. And I think this is what has come closer, but it's still a bit abstract. And I do believe that all of us have a responsibility and an opportunity to make a difference. not because of the planet, because the planet will go on without us, but the human race will potentially disappear if you don't do something, right? We are both the meteor and the dinosaurs at the same time, right? We are both destroying ourselves and we are disappearing if we don't do a difference. But that is very far away from our daily lives, right? So looking at how the next generation will have jobs, will have fresh air, will have good lives in all countries in the world, I think is one of the most engaging and motivating things we can do.
Yeah, for like folks like you and me, it's affecting us, but it's a small percentage of what it's going to turn into, right? That next generation is really going to be the one, and the generation after that, if some things don't change pretty quickly, and it needs to be accelerated a lot more, in my opinion. But I think you said something before about leadership. Is it really, and I'm paraphrasing here, about position? It's more about taking responsibility. So for ordinary people, how can they lead? What's some specific things that you think really makes a difference that may feel small in the big scheme of things, but you add all those up, if everybody does just a little bit, it can make a big difference. So let's talk a little bit about some of those specific things that individuals can do.
So I think very often people answer that question by saying, eat less meat, recycle more, drive electrical cars, travel less, and all of those things are, of course, correct, right? At the same time, I do believe that the individual could work more on systemic change. So how do we contribute? Because very often it ends up either you're an activist or you work in an organization like myself, with a climate organization, or you have to recycle. But I think there is a lot of space between these two parts of it. So how do we change the system? How do we use democracy? How do we participate in writing to politicians to take our own decision? And also, myself, I'm a teacher. I was not trained an activist. I was not trained a diplomat, where I've just been studying German and Spanish, but I ended up working in the UN, and later I sort of got to working with climate and nature because I wanted to. And I think there's a lot of people that believe that you have to do a specific education or you have to make it complicated. But I think it's really about using your ordinary job to do a difference. There's a lot of opportunity there, and in addition to that, of course, it's great that people take their individual choices and, like you asked about. But I really believe there is so many jobs that are already contributing, and having in mind how large this shift is, right? It's systemic shift. It's not about technology and about eating less meat and about storing more carbon, right? It's much more broader than that. Everybody can make a difference. The food sector is sometimes overlooked, right? Agriculture, the regenerative agriculture. How do you basically do farming in the old way and use natural fertilizer instead of the highly chemical ones? That kill off bees. I mean, things we've seen really working in Europe now is that everybody has their small garden. Instead of cutting the lawn, they're keeping the flowers. They're having a small place of where the bees can basically participate, right? And have their party instead of a lawn that is completely cut off and there is no life in a lawn, right? The way it is. So, yeah, so it ranges from these whole small things to actually use your ordinary daily job for making the difference that is needed. Construction, energy, isolation, electricians, teacher, of course, training the next generation for what we are going to face, what we already are facing in many countries, right? And I think that is something that I would like to bring forward more and more often. Use your occupation, not only your private life, to support the next generation.
Yeah, that's a really key point that you're bringing up here, Kim, because like the lawns, that makes a lot of sense. I know here in the U.S., everybody wants a nice, well kept, well manicured green lawn, but gosh, like wildflowers and things like that, and gardening, I could see that becoming a bigger thing in parts of the U.S. I'm not going to say every household will do it, but it doesn't have to be every household. It can be the ones where it makes sense to do. Again, every little bit helps. And the energy choices, I mean, just changing to like LED lighting or adjusting, where you're getting your electricity from. I know a lot of utilities in the U.S., and that may be changing with things happening here in this country, but you can actually opt in for clean energy where it's kind of
Yep.
RECs, renewable energy credits. You're buying clean energy. Instead of traditional fossil fuels. And those little things, that's just a click of the mouse or a check of a box on your electricity bill. Those will go a long way. So again, there are things.
The most efficient things we do is to reduce energy, right? Not
Mhm.
not necessarily to move from oil and gas to electricity as well, of course. But the easiest thing to do is use less energy.
Yeah.
And that's just another example. I mean, the meadow is a beautiful, nice one, perhaps instead of the lawn, but electricity efficiency. In the country where I'm from, Norway, it's estimated we can, without really influencing our daily lives, we can reduce it by 10%. That is a large part of the energy being consumed every day, right? And it would be similar in other countries, like the US, right? So I think there is a lot of opportunity here. And then, of course, uh, something that is often overlooked, and that is where the meadow actually comes in, and that is the nature-based solutions we have to reduce the emissions we need to do by 2030. So actually 37% of the emissions we need to get rid of can be taken care of by nature. So there's a lot of nature-based solutions in addition to technological solutions that we can use combined with energy production, right? So that is another perspective that sometimes is forgotten, that nature is a powerful storage for carbon. And the ocean is a specific and very important part of it, but of course also the rainforest, as many people know.
Yeah, can you talk a little bit more about what nature can actually do to help with this situation? I know, like you work with mangroves. Trees are a big deal here across America, but man, we're seeing kind of some efforts to get more into logging and the timber and this and that. And we understand there's got to be some of that, but there's other things to do too. Can you talk more about what nature can actually do to help solve this problem?
So very often we think that technological solutions are better than nature, right? That's our natural thinking. So one of the most polluting industries are the concrete we are using in construction, right? So let me give an example how efficient the nature can be compared to technological solutions. So the first concrete factory in the world that had a carbon storage system where you're using technology to take out this carbon, a CCS system. It's estimated to reduce approximately 1 million tons a year for the next years as they are building it up. The mangroves that we have planted in Worldview International Foundation in Myanmar will also remove 1 million tons of CO2 per year over 25 years. So it shows you that this is the first ever factory with a concrete sector that can reduce this with the CCS, but the mangroves can do the same job, right? I'm not saying that we should not do innovation in technology. Of course we should. But we should not underestimate to use nature, because while 1 ton of technological storage can cost up to 1,000 USD, a ton of nature-based storage can cost, somewhere between 10 and 50 USD. So it's much cheaper than the technological approach, right? So you said we worked with mangroves. Not everybody knows what mangroves are in the world, and certainly not in the US either, even though US has in Louisiana and Florida a lot of mangroves. Mangroves is a saltwater tree that lives in the crossing between the coast and saltwater, right? They are dependent on salinity. They're dependent on the tidings coming up and down every day, and they are in, whether it's rainforest, they're very often mangroves around the rainforest, right? And what do they do? It's one of the good examples of how nature actually works. So they store 5 times as much CO2 in the ground and in the tree as rainforests. They're extremely efficient carbon sinks. But they also have other co-benefits, which a technological installation would not have. I mean, they are an ecosystem in itself. Let me give you a look back to in 2015, we planted the first mangrove in Myanmar. 4 years later, in the same area, the wild elephants came back. They hadn't been there for many years. And when the wild elephant come back, the elephant is one of the largest animals in that ecosystem, obviously. Then all the other animals have come back, right? There is 2/3 of all tropical fish are born amongst the mangroves. And that, of course, again, gives jobs to more than 4 million fishers today, fishermen and fisherwomen, that are dependent on mangroves. So, of course, if you take them away, that will also affect the livelihood of local communities.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And yeah.
I know a little bit about mangroves, but that is pretty enlightening to me. Gosh, we need a lot more of that going on. That's a pretty simple thing to say. And let me pivot a little bit, because on the global level, I mean, you've worked for the UN, right? For Imagine, Worldview. You've seen a lot of these challenges, and you've seen some momentum. So what really gives you hope right now about where we're going? Because hope is something we need. We don't really have as much hope here in the U.S. With some things going on for a lot of reasons. But from you on the world stage and in Norway, what really gives you hope right now?
So I think what gives me the most hope now, that really gives me happiness every day, is that I'm following a lot of accounts on natures on Instagram, and almost every day there pops up a new post about a new species being saved or moved out of danger into less endangered than before. There's a lot of species that are coming back, that are moving back to areas where they have protected the forest, with the new areas of national parks. We are seeing a re-nature. On one side, we are seeing deforestation and nature disappearing. On the other side, we are seeing a counter development, which is really positive. There are several different species that are coming back, right? The buffalo is such an example in the US. They are coming back to much larger crowds than ever before, since we started killing them off, right? So there's a lot of hope in nature coming back. At the same time, we are at the edge of energy transition, a revolution basically, right? Or a reformation, perhaps better. I just read an article where they're concluding that for the first time ever, we see that the increased energy use that the world is producing, because more and more people get access to energy, is now being it's being supported by solar and wind, right? So even though we are increasing quite heavily the energy usage, now we are at the brink where actually that is not giving us more fossil production, but it's actually being able to be taken over by solar and wind and renewables, which is amazing. So I do believe, and most analysts do believe, that fossil fuels will be falling quite drastically. And everybody talks about how solar, and especially solar, is cheaper and also gives people more independency than fossil, right? And I recently talked to a couple of people working on renewable energy in Texas, and they were just saying, they're not doing this because they lower renewable energy. It's just much cheaper than oil and gas. So it's a simple, simple thing. They are capitalists. They are going to use the cheapest energy they can find. And they don't have they don't have money to be ideological towards also oil and gas.
Yeah, I deal with this every single day, Kim. Was in the fossil fuel power gen sector for the bulk of my career before I moved into clean energy, and it was for a lot of reasons. But the economics, that was a big reason. It's just that makes a lot of sense. And then the environmental aspects and all of that really are, some people could say icing on the cake, but really very important in just that clean energy transition and helping the planet. So let me close out with this last question for you. And that would be, what's the one message that you want people to remember when they think about their role in, let's say, protecting the planet and helping their environment?
I think it must be to use your occupation, the daily occupation, your job, to make this world a bit better. There's a lot of opportunities. You know it every day when you're a teacher, electrician, a farmer. Look at the small green and sustainable opportunities, the regenerative ones. I think this is more important, what you're doing at home. But that is, we need to do everything, of course, but really look to that. And you can, even though you are a German and Spanish teacher like myself, you can also join in an organization and change this world. We all have that opportunity.
Great answer. Great answer. Yeah, Kim, this has been great. Thank you for joining me, and thanks for everything that you're doing and with your team to help protect both people and the planet. This has been great. And then for everybody listening, I really hope this conversation helps you to realize that we're not powerless. The world doesn't need change from the top down. It's really going to come from everybody, every individual doing a little bit of something to make a contribution. Your work does matter. So if you want to learn more about Kim's work, we're going to have that in the comments. And if you really like this episode, it gave you something to think about, like, subscribe, hit that alert bell. It's all free, and it really helps to support what we do. So thanks again for joining us on the Clean Energy Edge.